Welcome to Harvard Business Review's The New World of Work. I'm Adi Ignatius, Editor-in-Chief of Harvard Business Review. And each week in this show, I interview a CEO, a thought leader, or somebody else who can inspire and educate us on the changing dynamics of the workplace. Our viewers are from all over the world, and they work at everything from Fortune 500 corporations to fledgling startups, from family businesses to nonprofits. The aim of this show is to provide insights for everyone as they navigate this transitional moment in how we organize ourselves in the business world. So in today's episode, we have another great guest, Andrew Liveris, the former CEO of Dow Chemical and the author of the new book, Leading Through Disruption. I'm going to come back with a proper introduction for him in just a moment. But first, let's hear from our friends at KPMG, who are our sponsors for this season of The New World at Work.
At KPMG, it's our people who make the difference for our clients. Talented teams leveraging the right technology to uncover insights that illuminate opportunity. Ready to make the difference together?
Okay, if you're already an HBR subscriber and you're watching this, you can head to hbr.org/newsletters to sign up for the New World of Work newsletter. I try to offer an inside look each week at these interviews and talk about some of the most interesting takeaways. Also, if you're not a subscriber and you like content like this, please consider subscribing to our magazine and website. The address is hbr.org/subscriptions. And if you like hearing smart people talk about some of the same issues we discuss in this show, be sure to check out our flagship podcast, IdeaCast, available wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, you can watch previous episodes of the show on YouTube or right here on LinkedIn and Facebook. All right, so my guest today is Andrew Liveris, a guy who wears a lot of hats. He is the inaugural president of the Brisbane 2032 Olympic Organizing Committee. He's the former CEO and chairman of Dow Chemical. He was CEO there from 2004 to 2018. And in that role, he won credit for pushing an ambitious sustainability agenda at one of the world's biggest chemical producers. He's also the author of the new book, Leading Through Disruption, A Changemaker's Guide to 21st Century Leadership. So Andrew, welcome.
Thank you, Ignatius. Nice to see you, Adi.
Yeah, so it's good to have you here. So I hope you don't mind, but I would love for you to give our viewers a quick sense of your own life journey from the Australian outback to leading a Fortune 100 company. It's not the typical CEO arc.
No, and given the differences in continents, Australia and the US, we're often, considered the new US in Australia, and the outback was always considered the part of Australia that Americans almost had a sort of a dream about, the original America, the Wild West. And Australia is definitely an American look-alike, but not the same. I grew up as in an immigrant family, like an American immigrant family. First to go to university, did chemical engineering, which my poor Greek-speaking mother, I don't think understood till the day she died what a chemical engineer did. I was just the prodigal son, first in the family to go to school, and then Dow hired me saying, if you join us, we'll show you the world. And they did. And, 43 years later, I retired from this great American institution. I tried to bring my Australian attributes to my job at all times, which was we're a fun-loving, passionate society. We love our sports. We could probably get back to that when I talk about Olympics. But we also like adventurism and take risks and are very forthright and candid. And, of course, marrying that with the American entrepreneurial spirit and this great country's, value system was a great combination. And I did most of that in Asia, where I also learned the power of relationships. And so along the way, I never thought I'd be CEO. I guess that's one of the tricks. Don't work to the next job. Work really well in the job you're in. People noticed me in the ability I had to create change and then deal with change. And this book is written because my time as CEO was just constant change. So that's a thumbnail sketch. I could add more, but there's a few chapters in the book that deal with that.
No, that's great. I think that's good context setting for the conversation we're going to have. Now, if you're watching this, if you have questions along the way for Andrew about disruption, about leading through disruption, put them in the chat and we'll try to get to some of those later. So let's talk about, the very title of the book suggests that we're in a moment of, where disruption has become the norm. And I want to pressure test that a little bit. I mean, is that are we truly in a more volatile world, or is it possible that our media consumption is giving us a distorted impression that change is more volatile, is happening more quickly than before?
Yeah, I think your question frames the difference. I mean, 100 years ago there was volatility, and 100 years ago there were world wars, and humanity has constantly been disrupted. But the cycle of disruption is just picked up because the amplification of connectivity, the digital age, the big technology revolution that we're all experiencing, is amplifying everything. It's the old Chinese adage, a butterfly flapping its wings in one part of China leads to a typhoon in another part of China. It's really amplification by connectivity. The digital disruption, which is well and truly upon us, is creating just a sense of ongoing crisis. And I call it the new abnormal. It's constant uncertainty. And the new paradigm, which is in the 21st century, our 20th century institutions were not built for that constant state of flux and uncertainty. And really fundamentally, the new, I call it disease of short-termism. Everyone wants an answer now. Everything has to be satiated now. Social media is making gratification instant. Everyone's expecting the new reality shows to show how to get to the end point without the hard work that we all had to learn in the 20th century. This is a very different model that we have to adjust to, and it's a new reality. And as the book will address and has addressed, is how to actually work away from divergence, where constant uncertainty is the new paradigm, to convergence, which is solution space. How do you begin overcoming these leadership vacuums that are appearing everywhere?
So let's assume, we can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, that this is the new reality and we can't wish it away. What's some advice, let's say for managers, for executives, to try to, succeed, stay ahead of the wave of change, the waves of change, to try to manage effectively in this volatile world?
I definitely, the book is written with this question in mind, which is, and really what I would love for the book to be is the foundation for the beginnings of some new solution sets, including new leadership models, a new contextual leadership model. And I begin to address it by saying, look, you can't therefore be the same leader all the time. You have to have a wide bandwidth. You have to be able to go to wide as well as deep. Just knowing your subject is not good enough. You have to be able to pivot and move around and hit the bandwidth of the conversations that are occurring, in many cases chaotically, but certainly adjacently. And I really bring forward then this notion that business, government, and civil society are locked together in a triangle, an equilateral triangle. And that as a result of that, you've got to move up and down those axes constantly and reinvent yourself as a leader. And to do that, you have to actually find sources of factual information versus just opinion. I mean, opinion is valuable and you need to hear what other people, stakeholders have to say, but center it on fact and get the facts from the source and go to the sources. And in my CEO world, that meant constant travel to the regions, constant travel to the sales offices and the factories, listening to people on the shop floor, listening to people, talking to customers, working with governments as partners, not as adversaries, a complete reinvention of the model of intake so you can get a better output, and then flux it fast. Embrace the reality of what you're hearing, make a choice, make several scenarios around those choices in case your main choice doesn't work. Absolutely lead the change yourself from the front line, and then build a team around you that can deal with that change, and then repeat and repeat and repeat. That model of leadership is not what's taught in the business schools. It's not what's taught. Actually, it's only taught in real life. And frankly, we've now got to impart those messages to people who aspire to be this type of leader. And it is definitely a lot of energy, a lot of passion, but a lot of judgment calls based on fact-based inputs.
So you mentioned earlier, you talked about the problem with short-termism, and that's one symptom, I guess, of the world, the volatile world we're living in now. Talk a little bit. I mean, you've always been a voice for kind of broad stakeholder, the CEOs, the companies need to pay attention, to their broad stakeholder base. But on the other hand, you're running Dow Chemical, a company where there's pressure to deliver quarterly results. And, I've heard CEOs say, yeah, you can do both. And I think our audience might be skeptical that you can do both. So can you talk a little bit about how to manage that balance? It cannot be easy.
Definitely not easy. And it's definitely not necessarily a new paradigm. I do think CEOs of a bygone era probably had the same version of it. But your very first question spoke to what's changed. What's changed is the speed of that and the impatience factor, in particular of the financial owner, that increasingly wants the short-term reward, dividend, share buyback, so that in turn they can deploy the funds in other areas and other opportunities. Or said another way, you, the leader of that enterprise, publicly owned, you, the board, aren't the best allocator of capital if all you're doing is looking at your sector. So that brings into mind in the roles that we all have to play in how capital gets allocated and what's the metrics against that capital allocation. It's fine to get short-term rewards where you can allocate the capital to a sector that your enterprise is not in. That absolutely is the breakdown and the breaking up of the conglomerate model that worked so effectively last century. Totally understand that. In fact, I exercised that with the putting together of Dow DuPont to create 3 viable, more vertically oriented companies. No problem with that. You absolutely totally have to do that. However, what has happened is when you take money or capital allocation away from the return 5 years hence and 10 years hence in your sector, you're abdicating leadership in your sector. And over time, you will die in that sector. So in other words, if you don't put money against R&D and don't put money against capital that in essence won't have a return for some time later, your portfolio allocation being so short term will only last as long as the decisions made by your forebearers give you a return. I inherited a Dow like that. I inherited a Dow that was making money off yesterday's inventions, but had nothing new coming. And the markets were saying, you know what, we'll rent their stock because they will eventually go private, be broken up, etc., etc. So what one has to do is to do both. Is you have to have a long-term strategy that shows long-term value creation viability to your owners and to your stakeholders. Put those programs in place. Put metrics in place that are 1, 2, 3, 5 years, not unlike what private equity does right now, by the way, while delivering the 90-day result. Is that hard to do? Absolutely. What it means is you have to portfolio manage from within. You have to fund the businesses that can actually grow and develop the long-term returns, while letting the short-term businesses that run for the short term bring the cash to fund for the long term, while at the same time appeasing the owner's need for return in the short term. Now, if that sounds like a lot all at once, it is. Therefore, at the end of the day, this ability to actually allocate capital across the 2 dimensions is not every board can do that. And I then have a whole chapter dedicated to the development of boards that can actually do what I just said, including, by the way, your embedded question, which I know you're going to get to, which is how to make sustainability a core part of the agenda going forward.
Yeah, well, maybe we should talk about ESG. So that's environmental social governance as a way to get to that topic. ESG is such a tricky concept and such a tricky metric, and there are people in the sustainability camp who think it all is just a bunch of greenwashing. Doesn't actually measure anything significant. At least in the United States, the right is sort of attacking ESG metrics as overly woke and that they're somehow antithetical to successful business. How do we make ESG work in the long term to really measure what matters and to be an integral part of business and not a kind of sideshow to it?
Yeah, I think the conversation, of late has gotten into the people yelling at each other conversation, which is wokeism or anti-wokeism. Businesses and companies like Dow that have been, pushing an answer to the question you just asked for the last couple of decades, even before my time, really were, at the end of the day, looking at it from the point of view that I get a license to operate. That license is given to me by society, and the rules of that license are set by governments. So society elects governments, governments puts in place regulations. I, the enterprise, follow the rules that are set by government for the benefit of society. that role in environmental management, of course, really brought to the table back in the Nixon era with the Clean Air Act and the 70s and the establishment of the EPA. Dow really put together an activity that said, okay, I need to fulfill compliance, obey the regulation, but now let me be anticipatory. I know the science behind my business. How can I help the EPA and the government agencies that regulate me put in place the better regulation, the smarter regulation? That, in essence, became the Clinton era and the development of the sustainability agenda for the government and for companies. Sustainability, what it meant was the license to operate sustainably by putting in place, the rules that had the triple bottom line in mind. And Dow was one of the authors of the triple bottom line piece of work, which was you've got to actually develop a profit, but you've got to have metrics alongside the environment pillar and the social pillar. What's happened in the OOs and now this current decade and going forward is E, S, and G has hit, of course, the domain of the public, and everyone is looking at E, S, and G and should look at them as separate items, but lumps them together and then simplifies, which is the first thing I say to the book. It's the first chapter in the book. I basically say stop the simplification by putting it together. It's not one acronym. It's three very different verticals that need regulations across each of the verticals that speak to the values of the 21st century. And the societal license to operate set by governments mean governments need to get educated on the new environmental regulations that are required, whether they be in climate change, whether they be in emissions, whether they be on the treatment of land and water, and all the things that we care about with the planet. The S part, which is inclusiveness, societal justice, and treating people equally, and inclusiveness, and the value of regulations and inclusiveness. And then governance, both big G and small g, governance from the point of view of government regulations and obeying the laws of the land, and small g, which is how boards operate with respect to shareholder and stakeholder duties. And all of those are complexities that need to be then put in place by corporations working with governments to help governments establish the right regulations in a partnership model. I see examples around the world where that works. They tend to be in more authoritarian regimes, top down, such as, say, a Singapore or a Korea or a Germany. They don't tend to work as well in market-based capitalist economies like the United States because of the trust model. The trust model is broken because people see it as interest politics, lobbying groups paying for the right regulations by lobbying your sector and your book. Basically, in my book, I say we need to now toss that out and put in place partnership models that collaborate so we get the right regs for the 21st century on digital, on E, on S, and on G. And that builds a sustainability agenda that in turn, for every corporation that complies with it, there are new profit pools that come from it and therefore become centric to your strategy. We need the new rules for this century more than ever. And it's the lack of those rules that's creating the disharmony and almost anarchy from society saying, I just don't believe government anymore and I don't believe business leadership anymore.
Yeah, well, that's really well said. I think we could maybe get an HBR article from that. So we'll talk later about that. I want to shift to talking about leadership more directly. You write in the book that in the early days at Dow Chemical, you look back and say you were too polite, too accommodating, too reverent toward the company and its long legacy, and to your predecessor. And that probably is familiar to a lot of people who are listening, who come into to challenge many executives face. So how do you balance a desire to be a change agent against respect for the traditions that have created the legacy that maybe brought you to the company in the first place?
All the training one gets growing through the corporate model is not to be a disruptor. Corporations have become large and were at one point in time small and innovative, developed the bureaucracies that large companies bring that ultimately end to their demise because small companies in their space end up literally, proverbially eating their lunch. And the chemical industry was a massive innovator last century, certainly in the first 50 years. And then the last half of last century, we stopped innovating as a sector because we made a lot of money out of the things that we had innovated and invented for modern America, for the modern world. And, pick your favorite area, from plastics to paints to, the things that lead to building materials to pharmaceutical ingredients, all the things that modern life enjoys. We were making a lot of money. And so the people in Dow and companies like Dow in the sector, I won't say got complacent, but knew what success looked like to be promoted. To be promoted, just, press, repeat, do, repeat. And therefore, what we ended up doing was cloning ourselves. We talked, inside boardrooms and inside meeting rooms to ourselves. What created the space to allow me to become a candidate and ultimately the CEO was I actually grew up outside of headquarters. I grew up in the Far East. I ended up becoming an entrepreneur within the big corporate bureaucracy. And when the candidacy for the CEO job came, we ended up fundamentally, it was a horse race, if you like, and I got chosen because I was more of an entrepreneur than my erstwhile peers. Now, what got me the job, the need for Dow to change its model, unfortunately for me, when I got the model, I said, okay, I'm just going to repeat what my predecessor did and put in place the team that was around him and now me. And I ended up putting people in place that had not bought into the change that actually won me the job. I quickly corrected that mistake, as I showed in the book, but it was really that lesson that, maybe it should have been obvious, but it was a very instructive lesson for me because it enabled me later when big crises came, like the global financial crisis, like the Kuwaitis withdrawing on us in the middle of our Roman Haas deal, like the activist attack. It enabled me to do something which maybe I wasn't trained to do before I became CEO, which is to move myself out of the job intellectually, emotionally, see what was needed in the job, and then change me in the job. I mean, changing yourself in the job, especially if you're doing well, is one of the hardest things to do. And I certainly benchmark the very best, people like Lou Gerstner and others that I talk about in the book. But that skill is something that I really drill down on in the book. And frankly, when I mentor younger CEOs, I really counsel them, step out of your role, look at your role, and say what's needed to win your role, not just get comfortable in the role.
Yeah, that's great. Let me, I'm going to go to a couple viewer questions now. And this is from Brian in Pennsylvania in the US. And it's really getting back to our conversation about short-termism. And the question is, what in your opinion cannot be rushed in business? In other words, how do we push back on, we got to have an answer now, especially in understanding customers better so that we can build services and products to reflect a sound strategy rather than the whim of the moment?
We have so many examples around us that are so topical. It's a great question, Brian. One is the energy transition. We have had fits and starts to the transition over 3 or 4 administrations. I would like to think that we, with this administration, have put in place a framework that won't be tossed out with the next administration, but it's that very lack of certainty from government policy that is stopping business from taking the risks it needs to take at the frontier of taking a risk on a new technology. To put in place new technologies, the patience model, you just have to look at the Chinese and their dominance of the renewable space in terms of technology development, and how did we miss batteries and how did we miss solar cells? We missed it all because no one was willing to partner with government to come up with the right framework for a long-term investment in the R&D. And actually, if you study innovation in America, our most innovative eras as a nation, World War I, World War II, and NASA, came because of government top-downing the rules of the road, in 2 cases to defend the nation and obviously protect freedom, in the third to put man on the moon. We need an era of constancy of purpose as a nation, and the energy transition is a great example of that. How do we have affordable transitions so we minimize the impact of fossil fuels while not crushing the economy? I think this is a great example of where long-term thinking and short-term results can be very toxic against long-term thinking. There are many other examples, one that I may or may not come up as a question, which is the new China. We are one more time making the mistake of looking at China as something that we can deal with by sitting in Washington and dealing it from there. A relationship-centric culture like China really is based on turning up, showing up, and then being consistent with purpose and allowing the win-win versus the win-loss. We're giving too many examples to China that we want a relationship based on win-lose versus win-win. And to put in place a win-win relationship with China in the new China needs a whole new paradigm of thinking about what constitutes a win for China and not a loss for the United States. In the book, I talk about that from the point of view of corporations. Are we indeed global corporations with headquarters in America, or are we American corporations operating globally? We better make that decision soon as it relates to China, because China's establishing its own playbook, and we haven't yet, as a nation, embraced it. As another good example of answering your question. And I've got a few more I can talk about, but I'll save some time for others.
Yeah. We could talk about the China thing for a whole episode, because I'm fascinated in that and in the U.S.-China relationship as well. A few viewers have asked, for the name of the book. This is Andrew Liveris, and the book is Leading Through Disruption, available wherever you get your books. All right. So next question. This is from Rahul from Pune, India, and the question is: so as you're trying to sort of lead and manage this disruption, the question is, how do you go about personal and organizational goal setting in this, as you're trying to keep pace with the disruptive forces?
I have really thought about that a lot, especially as I mentor younger. I've always been a mentor coach, because I was mentored and coached, so I saw the value of that, and this ability to run, and I call it an integrated life versus a balanced life. I think the word balance is a bad word, because it implies like a seesaw, an either or, and to find that middle ground is hard. Integrated means you're making conscious choice, to answer your question, Rahul, which is, think of life as 4 buckets, 4 pails, and on the pails you've got enough water to fill 2 buckets to the brim, and those pails are called self, family, friends, and work or professional. And now you're at your stages of life where you're filling the water in those buckets, and you're making a conscious choice where to put most of the water. Do you divide it equally across all 4 at all times, or do you, as I did, really prioritize along the way based on the stage of life you're at? And depending on where you are in your career and your stage of life, your partner, and whether your partner is full-time employed outside of the home, these are choices one has to make, and make them consciously, knowing that you're making trade-offs at all time. Of course, in the Zoom world, in the digital world, we can now do work in a very different environment. Of course, that embraces home life a lot more, but of course that brings its own challenges as well. I think I, at all time, thought about it as the most important things to me are, and I listed those, and I kept that list, in my left-hand drawer, so to speak. And in times when I had to tilt the water in one direction way more than the other, I knew it was temporary. I said, okay, for a while, like these crises at Dow, I'm going to be full-time at work, and my family's not going to see me, and forget time for myself, etc., and friends. So it's okay to make those temporary adjustments, as long as you got your long-term priority goals in mind at all times. Some people call that your North Star, your values, and your priorities all have to come together.
So I do want to ask you a little bit about the Brisbane Olympics. It's a long ways away, but you're already heading the organizing committee. How do you start to think about that? I mean, do you already have a sense of what you want the games to be, what you want the cities, how you want people to perceive the city and its own identity? Are there some early thoughts you could share with us?
It's a great privilege to be asked to lead your country's 3rd Olympics. For a country the size of Australia to say it's now going to be host to 3 Olympics since the modern Olympics were born is quite something. The country is passionate and loves sport, as I'm sure you're all noticing with the World Cup, Women's World Cup down there, FIFA's World Cup, which is amazingly successful and bringing out a lot of people, new spectators. Passion around sports is an Australian statement. My passion for my home country, because it gave me the start that led to my career, has never waned. I've always been an Australian as well as an American, as well as actually a Greek from my roots. And I've tried to be very true to that. When I was asked to lead the Olympics, I actually asked exactly the question that's being asked of me, which is, what are we creating here? Is a 2x2 week sporting event, Olympics and Paralympics, or is it a legacy? And then when you talk to the IOC about what they call the new norms is all about economic and legacy of the community kind. In the case of Australia, that speaks to the S part of ESG as much as the E part. So not only a clean and green games, climate positive, but also inclusive of all our First Nations people, our Indigenous Australians, a culture of 60,000 years, and legacies economically. You know, what can we do to stimulate the economy of Southeast Queensland before and after the games? We call it the 10+10 model. So it's a business proposition. It's the long-term answer. It's the question I got asked on short-term versus long-term examples. The Olympics is a great example. We've been given 10 years to plan that. We have the first 3 years exactly that, planning it. We'll get around to things that people will see as the obvious icons of the Olympics, mascot and opening ceremonies and volunteers and merchandise. We'll get around to that in year 4 or so. We're benchmarking in Los Angeles and Paris to see what they're doing along these pillars and really putting together this whole holistic plan. And what do we want to happen out as a result of this is the well-being of the people of Australia and the people of Southeast Queensland and Brisbane is elevated. For Brisbane, it's a second-tier city. Not many second-tier cities get the games. We're going to elevate Brisbane and the brand to the world stage, and we're not going to lose that advantage. Some early thinking about that, and those of you who have been to Australia know what I'm about to say. Those of you who haven't been, please come. We're a lifestyle superpower. The country just has got the balance between work and life right. It's a very wealthy country, so it can afford that, and its citizens in the main all benefit from it, with some exceptions, and I mentioned First Nations. So we are a lifestyle superpower, beautiful country, beautiful locations across the regions from the Gold Coast to Brisbane to the Sunshine Coast, some of the best beaches and aesthetics in the world, you know, rainforests, etc. So we're going to put on a show that really shows Brisbane and the region as a place to live and come and visit at a minimum.
Yeah, well put. I know we're running out of time, but I do want to get to this question, and this is also an audience question from Donna in Alabama in the U.S. You had mentioned Winwin specifically in the context of China, but you know, I think that's a value for you sort of more broadly in terms of business and collaboration. So the question is, you know, how do we all make the mental pivot to a win-win mindset when, you know, we're educated in business school and elsewhere very differently?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Donna, and I'm so happy it's come at the back end and almost the close of the show, because, you know, I start and finish the book with optimism, and then I really say, why this book? I mean, I could have written an autobiography. I'm not sure anyone would have bought it, but anyway, it would have pleased me to write my story. But I really wrote the book with your question in mind, which is, I see so much divergence, as I said at the beginning. The convergence has to begin and end with this notion that change has to happen through, firstly, conversations, secondly, debates, thirdly, decisions, and fourthly, come out of, if you like, a bottom-up mindset that we haven't seen for a while. And I in the book, I call it community-centered and regionally centered. I think the global world order has been challenged now to a point where we all have mistrusted it. You mentioned China in your question, and distrust governments. So we need a new type of business leader, a new type of political leader, and we need it from the demographic and the next generation to embrace that and say, I'm going to go and serve to create this sense of optimism and solution mindset, this new convergence, this new collaboration model. Let's lay down our arms, if you like, and our arms can be words on social media. And let's get into the room around the table and find the solution mindset that leads to better answers for everybody in society, not just for parts of society. In the book, I say, I put a call to business to take that lead. I see that, by the way. There are a lot of CEOs out there now who are taking that lead. They're getting hacked and chopped up in this wokeism debate, which is nonsense. And some of our political candidates make fodder out of it. I think we should have the courage to stand tall and say, we have to be optimistic on a solution that is inclusive and that has new ways of getting to answers on how to get economic prosperity for all and how to do it in the context of a Milton Friedman model, but where democracy and capitalism are together, not going through a divorce. And for that, I need people like you to step up and be at the table. Define the 21st century playbook. I hope this book serves as a foundation for it, and I certainly won't, in my Act 2, stop talking about it. but I need amplification from people like yourself.
That's fantastic, Andrew. Thank you for joining us. I wish you could run for president of the United States, but you're probably not eligible. But anyway, thank you. You know, a lot of really inspiring ideas and really good sense of balance. So thanks for being the guest on our show today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adi.
All right, so that was Andrew Liveris, former chairman and CEO of Dow Chemical and author of the book Leading Through Disruption. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Just a reminder, you can watch previous episodes of this show on YouTube or right here on LinkedIn and Facebook. Be sure to join us next week, Wednesday, August 16th at 12 noon Eastern Time, when my guest will be Jim Fielding. He's done a lot of things, including he served as the president of Disney Stores Worldwide, and he's the author also of a new book called All Pride, No Ego, A Queer Executive's Journey to Living and Leading Authentically. We'll talk about his triumphs and challenges as a gay executive. So if you're an HBR subscriber watching this, you can head to hbr.org/newsletters to sign up for the New World of Work newsletter, where I offer an inside look each week at these interviews and talk about some of the biggest ideas that come out of them. And if you like content like this, why not subscribe to our magazine and website? The address is hbr.org/subscriptions. And finally, we want to thank our friends again at KPMG, who are our sponsors for this season of the New World of Work. And thank you all for tuning in today. I'm Adi Ignatius, and this is the New World of Work.